Odi kandung ba dubahakung riti nalaveroliya manzilang mi datureke hivare mi kolleve.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a stack of source material, could be articles, research, books, our own notes, and really boil it down. We try to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge for you. Our mission, simple, get you well-informed, quickly, and thoroughly. Today, we're plunging into a really critical topic, judicial independence. And our main guide for this is a fascinating book, Guardians of Judicial Independence, The Resilient Justice in the Maldives, by Professor Ahmed Ely Mustapha. Now, his background is pretty impressive, a Juris Doctor, a PhD, but also things like project management, PMP, even cybersecurity certification, CEH. It tells you we're getting a really layered perspective here. So the big question we want to tackle is this. How does a nation like the Maldives, which has this really unique mix of Islamic tradition and modern constitutional law, how does it protect its judges? Keep them impartial, autonomous, especially when, political pressures inevitably arise. It's a real balancing act. And I think the Maldives offers some quite profound lessons.
It really does. And it's so important to remember, judicial independence isn't just some dry legal idea, right? It's fundamental. It's a pillar for liberty, for democracy, the rule of law, really, everywhere. And digging into how it works or faces challenges in a specific place like the Maldives, well, it gives invaluable insights. It shows how these big universal principles actually play out and adapt on the ground in a very distinct cultural and historical setting.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this idea of judicial independence in the Maldives. Where does it begin? You've got these universal principles, but how did they really take root and maybe even change in the Maldivian context?
Well, from the modern constitutional angle, it's fundamentally about the separation of powers. That's the bedrock. The idea that judges need to be free to make decisions without, inappropriate influence from the government, the legislature. And you see that reflected in things like transparent ways to appoint judges, secure tenure so they can't just be fired easily, having enough resources. For the Maldives, the absolute game changer was the 2008 Constitution. This wasn't just tweaking things. It was a fundamental reset.
A complete shift.
A complete shift. It was like a national declaration saying our judiciary is independent. It firmly rejected decades where the executive often held too much sway. And crucially, it set up the Judicial Service Commission, the JSC. Its whole purpose was to oversee appointments, discipline, basically act as a buffer.
Right, a dedicated body.
Exactly. But that's only part of the story. The influence of Islamic jurisprudence is, it's immense and goes back centuries. There's a core principle for judges, fearing none but Allah. It's right there in the Quran, Surah 5, verse 44.
Meaning their ultimate accountability isn't to politicians.
Precisely. It's to divine law, to their conscience under that law. And historically, you had figures like Caliph Umar who, way back, actually institutionalized the separation of judicial and executive roles. Very deliberate. And then there's this classical framework, Adab al-Qadi.
Which translates roughly to
judicial etiquette, essentially. It's a whole classical code for ethical conduct for judges. Super detailed, strict rules against conflicts of interest, judges accepting favors or gifts, things like that. It's quite comprehensive.
Wow, okay. So you have this modern constitutional layer and these deep Islamic roots. But what about the Maldives' own history? How did its specific journey shape the judiciary we see today?
That's a really interesting path. If you go way back, before Islam arrived around 1153 AD, you had customary law for Ruverdun. The king was the ultimate authority then, but often advised by councils of elders, the Kiavebe Kanja Ashi. So even then, there was this tradition of, let's say, collective wisdom and respected figures involved in justice.
Kind of early checks and balances, maybe?
In a way, yes. Then, after 1153, Islam becomes central. The Qadi, the Islamic judge, gets institutionalized, and Sharia law becomes the main legal foundation. Fast forward a bit, you get more formal structures. The Mahkamatul Sharia, the formal Islamic court system established in 1909, initially the idea was for it to be pretty independent. But over time, especially under the 1932 Constitution, Article 80, for example, lines blurred. Executive control started creeping back in. Later reforms under Presidents Nasir and Qiyum did set up new courts, criminal, family, juvenile, civil courts, even a high court. But the president still held quite a lot of power over appointing judges, even overturning decisions sometimes.
So independence was often more theoretical than real.
It often struggled against executive dominance, which makes the 2008 Constitution such a watershed moment. That's when they formally enshrined independence, created the Supreme Court as the apex body, and crucially established that independent JSC to really try and insulate the judiciary from politics.
It really sounds like this complex weaving together of different threads: ancient custom, Islamic law, modern constitutionalism. So how do you actually prepare judges to operate effectively within this intricate system and, importantly, uphold those high standards of independence?
Right, because it's one thing to have the structures, but how are judges actually equipped? Let's get into the modern techniques, but also how that deep-rooted wisdom plays a part in building judicial resilience there.
It's a really fascinating blend, actually. On the modern side, they do a lot of collaboration with international partners. For instance, they have an agreement, an MOU, with India's National Judicial Academy. So Maldivian judges get specialized training in India covering things like judicial skills, constitutional law, human rights, and increasingly important ICT skills.
Tech is everywhere now, even in the courtroom. Absolutely. And the Max Planck Foundation has been involved too with training of trainers programs focusing on putting human rights principles into practice effectively. And this isn't just, sitting in lectures, it's very practical. Scenario-based exercises are key. They run judgment writing workshops, they simulate case management, hold debates on tricky ethical dilemmas judges might face.
So learning by doing.
Exactly. It's about building practical skills, how to multitask under pressure, maintain self-control, manage a courtroom effectively. They've even piloted projects to evaluate judges on things like integrity, fairness, communication skills, giving them direct feedback.
That's the modern toolkit. But you mentioned Islamic jurisprudence earlier. How does that get woven into the training?
That's where it gets really unique. The concept of ijtihad is vital.
Which is
independent reasoning. It's the idea that judges can and should use critical analysis of legal sources to adapt core principles to new contemporary challenges. And importantly, it empowers them to resist external pressure by grounding their decisions in careful legal reasoning. Then you have accountability mechanisms like Hizbah. It's essentially about public accountability, ensuring judges are answerable not just to the law, but also to the community they serve. But crucially, it's framed in a way that also protects them from purely arbitrary political or executive interference. It's a balance.
Okay, you've covered the modern training methods and the Islamic legal tools, but you also touched on Maldivian cultural wisdom earlier. How much does that traditional culture actually permeate this? Does it create maybe unique challenges or even unexpected strengths compared to, say, a purely Western legal training model?
That's a really perceptive question. It's deeply embedded, and I'd say it offers definite strengths. Take the concept of jamhuri.
Collective good.
Yes, the collective good. It's not just a phrase. It genuinely drives this idea that justice must aim for social harmony, for the well-being of the community. Remember the KV Bikalanje Ashi, the councils of elders. Traditionally, dispute resolution wasn't just about a verdict. It was about restoring balance within the community.
Holistic.
Exactly. And that history builds an expectation of justice being accessible, community-focused. Then you have oral traditions like Langjiri, which is a type of narrative storytelling used for moral lessons, and Handi Jahun, a traditional way communities solve problems through careful, deliberative discussion. These practices foster values like honesty, careful consideration, and they shape public expectations of how judges should behave. So there's a strong cultural emphasis on transparency, accessibility in court, which is reinforced by Islamic values of fairness and integrity. It's all geared towards building and maintaining public trust.
It sounds like this very holistic approach is absolutely crucial then. It helps judges feel anchored in values, not just, reciting laws from a book. Okay, so you have these foundations, this training, this cultural grounding. But even then, judicial independence, well, it's often tested, isn't it? Let's talk about how the Maldivian judiciary prepares for and navigates those moments of pressure, especially from other branches of government.
Yeah, that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. Constitutional law drills are absolutely essential. Article 141 of the 2008 Constitution is key here. It declares the Supreme Court the highest authority and explicitly forbids interference. It's the shield. So judges actually train using scenario-based exercises. They simulate situations where their independence might be challenged.
Like what kind of situation?
Oh, things like hypothetical attempts by government officials to influence a pending decision, or maybe simulated legislative maneuvers designed to curb judicial power or funding. The drills focus on quickly identifying the relevant constitutional protections and figuring out the appropriate lawful responses under pressure.
And Have there been real-world instances where this kind of preparedness was, well, necessary?
Unfortunately, yes. The book details some significant cases. For example, there was a major Supreme Court crisis back in 2015. It involved the impeachment and suspension of 2 Supreme Court justices, which many saw as politically motivated. It effectively paralyzed the court for a time, led to public protests.
Wow.
It really highlighted how vital it is for judges to understand their rights and tenure security, and the real dangers when the executive branch exerts too much influence over the JSC, the body meant to protect them. Also in 2015, there was another incident, a very swift amendment to the Judicature Act. It reduced the size of the Supreme Court bench and controversially, retroactively declared certain sitting justices incompetent just before a critical hearing was scheduled.
That sounds like a direct challenge.
It was widely seen as such. And it really underscores why judges need drills focusing on things like proper constitutional amendment procedures and the fundamental principle of judicial tenure. They also look outwards, drawing lessons from comparative constitutional law, how courts in places like Canada or Italy have handled similar pressures.
These are incredibly high-stakes situations, aren't they? They really show how fragile even established systems can be. Thinking about those moments, what's maybe the most surprising lesson the Maldivian judiciary learned from these pressures? And how do judges personally cope when faced with that kind of acute crisis?
That's a really crucial point because it touches on personal and institutional resilience. The 2018 Supreme Court arrests and the state of emergency provided some absolutely stark, unforgettable lessons. You had the Chief Justice and another senior judge arrested after the court ordered the release of several political prisoners. It was a dramatic demonstration of just how fragile independence can be when political tensions boil over.
Unbelievable.
The surprising lesson, perhaps, was the sheer audacity of the challenge. It forced a very sobering recognition that vigilance can never be relaxed. The threats can be very direct. So in response, their training now includes much more robust crisis management protocols. We're talking coordinated planning, having multidisciplinary crisis response teams ready, ensuring clear and continuous communication strategies for managing these intense scenarios. And the law of contempt also becomes a really critical tool in those moments. It allows judges to protect the court's proceedings from direct interference, to maintain order and assert the court's authority, even when facing immense external pressure.
These aren't abstract legal theories, then. These are vivid, real-world examples of justice operating under extreme duress. So we've talked about the foundations, the training, the defensive drills, but how is the judiciary in the Maldives proactively building resilience for the future, ensuring integrity in what's, let's face it, a rapidly changing world? I imagine technology must be part of that picture.
Oh, absolutely. Technological fortification is a huge focus. They're leveraging online learning platforms, making training more accessible, especially given the geography reaching judges across widely dispersed islands. They're even exploring things like VR simulations for more immersive experiential training in handling courtroom scenarios or ethical dilemmas.
Interesting. VR for judges.
Yeah, it's cutting-edge stuff. And AI, artificial intelligence, is starting to make an impact too. We see this in other places, like Qatar AI assisting with legal research, even preliminary drafting, case management analysis. Of course, this brings its own challenges. You need very clear guidelines, specific training for judges on how to use these tools responsibly and ethically.
Right. You can't just plug it in and hope for the best.
Exactly. They're also looking at things like blockchain technology. The potential there is for creating immutable, tamper-proof records of judicial documents, judgments, orders that could significantly boost transparency and integrity. And, of course, the big shift towards virtual courtrooms, accelerated by the pandemic, but likely here to stay in some form. It improves accessibility, ensures continuity of service, especially during emergencies or for remote islands. It's really changing the face of justice delivery.
Okay, so technology offers tools for efficiency and maybe even transparency. But efficiency isn't enough, is it? Trust is built on ethics. Let's talk about that ethical scaffolding. What structures are really in place to ensure judicial integrity?
You're absolutely right. Ethics are the absolute bedrock. Without integrity, the whole system loses public trust. A key move was adopting the Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct. These are internationally recognized principles covering independence, impartiality, integrity, propriety, equality, competence, and diligence. It provides a strong, clear framework.
Calm standard.
Yes. And alongside that, you need robust accountability mechanisms. Things like internal appeal processes, peer review systems, transparent ways for the public or lawyers to raise complaints. The tricky part is ensuring these mechanisms uphold ethical behavior without undermining judicial independence. It's a fine line to walk.
Protecting judges from frivolous or politically motivated complaints, you mean?
Precisely. There's also a growing push for greater transparency, things like discussions around public disclosure of judges' assets. The idea is to foster public confidence, prevent even the perception of bias or corruption. And, this focus on ethics isn't new. It connects back to ancient precedents like the Code of Hammurabi, which emphasize fairness and making laws publicly accessible. And again, Islamic ethics play a huge role, stressing virtues like sincerity and niyyah, meaning right intention, humility, and that deep sense of accountability, not just to the state, but to God and society.
Are there specific examples from the Maldives where these ethical challenges have really come to the forefront?
Yes, the book provides some stark illustrations. Those 2015 Supreme Court suspensions we mentioned earlier, they involved serious allegations of political intimidation and a denial of due process for the justices involved, raising fundamental ethical questions about the process itself. There have also been investigations into the conduct of some lower court judges, like Judge Rasmina Idris and Judge Hassan Saeed mentioned in the source. These cases inevitably raise public questions about conduct standards, consistency, and potential bias, showing why clear ethical rules and enforcement are so critical for public reception.
And the impact on public trust must be significant when things like that happen.
Immense. But there are also powerful positive examples. The book includes a poignant story, anonymized perhaps, of a justice who faced immense pressure, possibly involving corruption attempts and retaliation, but stood firm. It's a stark reminder of the personal courage it can take to uphold integrity, sometimes at great personal cost.
Those examples, both the challenging ones and the inspiring ones, really drive home just how vital that robust ethical framework truly is for any judiciary, hoping to maintain credibility and public trust. Okay, so we're nearing the end of our deep dive. Let's look outwards a bit. How does the Maldivian judiciary connect with the wider world? How does it leverage global partnerships? And what does it really take to ensure that this independence isn't just a snapshot in time, but is sustained long-term? It can't exist in isolation, surely.
No, definitely not. You're spot on. International leverage and cross-jurisdictional training are absolutely vital, especially for a smaller nation. Global cooperation brings in specialized expertise. Think about programs like the Energy Sinnerpolia Counterterrorism Adjudication Toolkit. That provides highly specific training for judges dealing with complex terrorism cases, drawing on global best practices.
Which is crucial in today's world.
Absolutely. And treaties play a role, too. For example, the India-Maldives Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, the MLAT, helps streamline cooperation in criminal investigations and prosecutions that cross borders. Very practical. You also see collaborations like the Judges Colloquium on Human Trafficking, organized with the International Organization for Migration, IOM. These events foster a shared understanding and commitment to upholding human rights standards across borders.
So learning from others and contributing back.
Exactly. And then there are broader projects focused on systemic improvement, like the Canada-Maldives Judicial Independence, Accountability, and Professionalism Project, JAP. These initiatives help promote international best practices specifically around judicial ethics, accountability mechanisms, and professional standards. It's about constantly benchmarking and improving. And looking ahead, to really ensure sustained resilience, it requires more than just occasional training or projects. It's about continuously cultivating those institutional safeguards we talked about.
Like the JSC.
Yes. Continually empowering bodies like the Judicial Service Commission, making sure it remains independent and effective. Securing genuine budgetary autonomy for the judiciary is also critical, so it isn't vulnerable to financial pressure from other branches. And it means an ongoing commitment to professional development for judges, not just one-off courses. Providing well-being support is also increasingly recognized as important given the high-pressure nature of their work. Burnout is a real risk.
And staying prepared for crises.
Definitely. Regular crisis simulation exercises, building on the lessons learned from past events to keep those response mechanisms sharp. Ultimately, though, it boils down to fostering a pervasive culture right through the judiciary of vigilance, of adaptability, and maintaining strong, transparent connections with the community they serve. That trust is the final, indispensable element.
It really does paint a picture of an institution that has to be constantly learning, adapting, and frankly, fighting to uphold its core mission, drawing strength from its unique blend of ancient wisdom and modern global practices. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've navigated this really intricate journey of judicial independence in the Maldives. We've seen its historical roots, the deep influence of Islamic principles, the modern constitutional framework, the challenges faced, and some really innovative solutions being put into practice. You've really shown us how traditional wisdom and cutting-edge global practices are being woven together there.
And I think the key takeaway really is that judicial independence isn't some kind of static thing you achieve and then, dust off your hands. It's incredibly dynamic. It's an ongoing process that demands constant vigilance, constant adaptation from everyone involved, judges, lawyers, politicians, the public. It's fundamentally about building and rebuilding a justice system that commands respect precisely because it's responsive and accountable to the people it serves. It has to keep evolving.
So for you, our listener, perhaps here's a final thought to mull over as we wrap up. We live in a world that's just flooded with information. Governance feels incredibly complex everywhere. How might understanding this specific and often challenging journey of the Maldivian judiciary, its resilience, maybe deepen your own appreciation for that delicate balance of power that's essential in any democracy? And maybe ask yourself, what role do transparent, ethical institutions like an independent judiciary truly play in building and maintaining public trust globally, especially when they face intense political or social pressures? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.